Hey, everybody. Welcome to this first time live event with me, Roel, and your co host, Francois. We have a special guest, David Coleman. So, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Oh, good. Thanks for having me, fellas.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here, David. Hey, oh, let me mute my video here. Sorry, I had the live stream.
Hey, that's what happens in live things, right?
It
Something
does.
always pops up.
I'm like, wait, why do I hear myself in the video? But
Right.
this is the first time we're having a live event where we have a guest. It's usually been me and Francois, and even then, it's usually very rare that we do the live events, just because it's really difficult to get everyone's schedules aligned, right? And with
Yeah.
me being on the West Coast, and I don't, are you on the East Coast, David?
Yeah, I'm on the East Coast. I'm in my house. I live in Georgia. I have a couple homes in
Okay.
Georgia, and this is my primary home in the North Georgia mountains, in Blue Ridge, Georgia. So,
Yeah, and Francois is over in Canada on the East Coast, and so it's been challenging to schedule a lot of things as everyone's busy. So I appreciate you taking the time, David, to join us here for an AMA, and we put some questions out there for people to kind of ask to get to know you more. A lot of us do know you from your presentations that you do at WLPC, at different conferences, and I thought it would be great to get to know you a little bit more personally, other than seeing you on stage.
Yeah, and
okay.
we
Well,
already had a question about your pickup truck in the chat. So
oh, awesome. All right. I love my pickup truck. I can't wait
Uh,
for that question.
Well, why don't we just start with that one?
Okay.
sure.
What
It's
exactly is the question?
It's more a joke than a question. Anders was saying I could ask about David's pickup truck, but maybe that question is too extreme.
No, well, I do work for Extreme Networks. How's that for a shameless plug? I'll get another one in later. But no, when my wife and I bought, I have a home in Atlanta, but 3 years ago, my wife and I bought another home here in the mountains of Georgia, and this is where we spend most of our time. And you can't be driving around here with an electric car. You need four-wheel drive. And so 3 years ago, I bought a Dodge Ram Longhorn pickup truck, and my wife, as a present, jacked it up and had it lifted 6 inches too, with the big expensive tires. And had you told me 10 years ago that that's what I'd be driving, I would have laughed at you. But now that's, I tool all around the mountains and little bit of off-roading in my big pickup truck. And probably why Anders asked about it is the fact that I've used it in analogies in some presentations I've done live before. So
Mhm. Awesome. Okay, so we'll start with the Wi-Fi questions.
sure,
The
let's
the
do it.
question the question we usually ask everyone is, how did you start with Wi-Fi? So we'll start with this one just to break the ice. Can you tell us, David, how you started with Wi-Fi and how you ended up in the position that you are in today?
Yeah, so it kind of happened sort of by mistake. I was actually laid off. I was working as in my late 30s, early and about to turn 40, at a circuit board manufacturing shop, and where I did a lot of things, but I also ran the network there. And that's kind of where I kind of broke my skills on basic networking skills. And long story short, I got laid off. And so I went looking for a job, and I went to a big conference in Atlanta called Comdex at the time. And pardon me, the companies were demoing this new wireless technology that wasn't called Wi-Fi then, and it was pretty much a niche. But I saw it and became interested in it, and so I started learning about it. And long story short, because I was unemployed, I had to do something to make money. So I've always kind of had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I just on a whim started a Wi-Fi training and consulting company at the time, and did that for about 10 years before I went to work for a startup. So the technology wasn't even called Wi-Fi. I pretty much was self-taught. That along with right around the same time was the genesis of the CWNP program too, when they had their first certification of CWNA when it came out. So I kind of started meeting some people with like-minded experiences at about the same time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did you learn about Wi-Fi at that time? Because if it was pretty niche and the beginning of it, like, how did you meet those people that, you ended up
Yeah.
working with? Yeah.
So, it's funny. A lot of it came out of the CWNP program, meeting, people like Westcott in a train the trainer class, and Keith Parsons. That's how I met him in a I think a beta class for CWSP. That's the first time I met Keith, and of course, Devin and all Devin Aiken and Kevin Sandlin and all the guys that started the CWNP program. That's when I first kind of met all those fellows. But through that, I started meeting other people that have all gone on to other aspects of the industry. Kimberly Graves, another person, she works at a competitor of ours, and a lot of people since then, and then not just people that I met that were trying to get into that industry, but also as I started teaching and learning about Wi-Fi and consulting with people, I started meeting people that would go on to start their careers with Wi-Fi. They were just learning for their company and stuff. And I sometimes run into people that say, "Hey, don't you remember you taught me a CWNA class back 20 years ago and blah, 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 and my whole career changed, blah," so it's funny and all over the world. So, but a lot of it, the basic training was collaborating with a lot of the people at the CWNP program and all the people that were involved on the side. But a lot of it was self-taught as well. And I think one of the best early decisions I made, at least on the technical side, for learning Wi-Fi in general, was I broke down and forced myself to learn packet analysis and frame analysis. So I think I had an early version of Air Magnet, and I also was using wild packets at the time. And I just started looking at frames and trying to figure out how this stuff worked. And I had a copy of the standard, and I was always reading the standard. And sometimes, and that's also how I figured out how all the different types of EAP and 802.1x work. Because back in the early days, there was so much misinformation about 802.1x and EAP in the early days. And we're going back to LEAP, back when that was out, and there was just a lot of bad information out there. And so what's the old saying? Packets don't lie,
Yeah.
So that was a big thing for me, was taking a look at frame analysis, and it really kind of put it in my head. Oh, so this is how this stuff works, at least at layer 2. Layer 1's a whole nother discussion, but the layer 2 part, that really opened my eyes.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah. Well, now, now we have Wireshark that helps us a little bit to decode the frames. Hopefully, we're not decoding the exa
no
frames.
No. Well, it's look, we can't all be like a Peter McKenzie, who's I think people in the industry know that he's probably the master of wireless packet analysis. Yeah. And by the way, I probably should have mentioned his name early. I met him through some Train the Trainer class, and I even asked him years ago to co-author some chapters of an old CWAP book with me. And so it's but at the end of the day, anybody that's learning Wi-Fi, you should be able to you should learn at least basic frame analysis and understand about how the exchanges work, because so many of the operations of how Wi-Fi works, like roaming, security, everything else, is all right there at layer 2.
It is, yeah. Okay. And I would probably consider Peter to be the frame whisperer. He seems to
the frame whisperer.
He knows everything about frames.
Yeah, he really does. And, I'm no Peter McKenzie, but back in the day, I used to look at wireless packets every day. And I used to be good. I can remember a couple of times people would they couldn't figure something out. They'd throw a packet capture at me, and I was able to figure it out in 5 minutes, and they had been looking at it for days, but it was right there in black and white. Now, that being said, that's something I miss, because I don't look at packet captures that much anymore, because I'm off to doing other things. But I still look at them when new technologies come out to try to understand some things, but I'm not doing the troubleshooting and the deep analysis that like a Peter McKenzie does. So yeah, if anybody doesn't know who we're talking about, go look up Peter's videos. He is the
Mm-hmm.
frame whisperer.
Yeah, and take his classes. He'll get
Take
you
his
down
classes.
he'll help you pass the CWAP if you're having any challenges there.
Right, which is probably the hardest of all those exams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Oh, for sure. Hands down.
Okay, I have a couple of questions which will be more for people starting their career today. The first one is, what did you do that massively impacted your career in the right way? And the second one is, what is the biggest Wi-Fi mistake you've ever made, if you're willing to share? And what
uh-huh.
did you learn from it?
Well, let's take the impacted your career in the right way. I think I already mentioned one, is that I learned frame analysis, right? And but and I forced myself to learn it. So you can never stop learning, whether it's through classes from Peter McKenzie or other people on other topics, or just researching things on your own. We have the internet. Now we have generative AI. There's all kinds of stuff for free that wasn't even available 25 years ago. That's just there for the taking to learn. So, to me, learning and teaching myself was vastly important, and getting hands-on very early too, and touching Wi-Fi gear and playing with it, breaking things. Breaking things on purpose. Broke plenty of things by accident, but breaking things, I mean, that's the best way to learn how to troubleshoot, right?
Yeah.
So how do you learn how to troubleshoot something? And how do you know if you don't see that it's broken, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so breaking things was and getting hands on is really good. Obviously, the biggest thing that impacted my career, though, was when writing. And so I started early on writing some white papers, some that I just put out there on their own, some that I actually did for companies. I wrote one for Fluke, I wrote one for Cognio, and then my name got out there. And then eventually I got a call by a publisher to author a book about to compete with the official CWNA study guide, and that was the best decision I ever made, because that book has become my calling card still to this day. Westcott and I, well, I think we're in like 6th edition now, and so it is. If the writing itself forced me to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and by reaching things, and also it it also validated me as kind of a spokesman in a way, and it got my name out there. So I don't make a lot of money on books, but it's the best thing that I ever did for my career. And then the last thing, so it's all about different points in time, and I'll get to the mistakes in just a minute. But the other thing I did too is the biggest decision I made was. I shut down a very lucrative self-employment business when I was working for myself to go to work for a startup company called Arrowhive. And it was a big chance. But they were disruptive, and they had a disruptive architecture that is now widely adopted by a lot of other vendors with a distributed architecture. And that architecture is not one of the wireless solutions that is now available for my current employer, Extreme Networks. But I actually took a pay cut to go do that. And I don't have any regrets, because it opened me up to a whole new world and a bunch of new people working for a vendor. So, change is good. So taking a chance at different points in my life, I thought were very good for my career. The biggest mistakes, God, I've made so many mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. When I was self-employed, I used to have a $10,000 a year stupid budget. And that was, so you guys are both self-employed, right? So I called it my $10,000 a year stupid budget, because every year it seemed like I'd make some stupid mistake where I'd spend money on something for growing my business, and it was a complete waste of money. So I would just budget in $10,000 every year for some stupid business mistake, like including buying buying the wrong piece of equipment, or
Hmm.
even making or trusting somebody, the wrong person, or something like that, that ended up costing me money. Um, Other mistakes I made when I was working for myself. A lot of people told me what I needed to do to scale my business was to hire people. And I did hire people as subcontractors, but I never wanted to hire anybody full time. So I could have really grown my business and scaled it probably to be a lot more to what it ever was. I don't have any regrets, but I should have listened to those people. The only way you ever scale a business um, is to delegate tasks
Hmm.
and scale it out to other people. Um, and then, if I had other things to do over, I probably would have been a little bit less of a workaholic over the years. Now that I'm in my mid 60s, I've calmed down a little bit, but for many, many years, both working for a startup company and also self-employment, I just, all I did was work, right? And should
Hmm.
have stopped. And so you guys are still young. I'd recommend you stop and smell the roses a little bit. Far as Wi-Fi mistake, I made a bad purchase on a piece of equipment on the advice of somebody who I will not name. And I bought a enterprise wireless gateway by a company called Vernier Networks. When enterprise wireless gateway, there was like two companies that made them at the time, them and what was the other company? I can't remember right now. But at the end of the day, that architecture lasted for about 6 months, and then it got replaced by wireless LAN controllers. So that was like a $5,000 technical mistake that I made. So
It's under the budget. So you can
yes,
Yeah.
and it was under the budget. Still, I had another $5,000 to make that year, and stupid
Yeah.
mistakes. And believe me, I did. So,
No, that's not too
so
bad. But that must have been right when controllers started making their impact on the
they were
industry.
just coming out, right? And even like Vernier Networks, I think they completely shifted gear. And what was the other company? They got bought by Adtran.
Oh,
God, I can't
Edtran.
remember. Yeah, but it was the
Uh,
company that they bought. I can't remember the
was it
name.
like
Oh,
the blue
BlueSocket.
socket? Yeah.
BlueSocket. Yeah, they had an enterprise wireless gateway too, and they were smart enough to shift and
Hmm.
turn their solution into a controller for a while. So,
Yeah.
and then they became a controllerless solution. But the gateways, in case anybody didn't remember, it was just a management platform for autonomous APs.
Hmm.
Bottom line is what it
Mhm.
was at the time, and it lasted for half a minute. So,
It's like two technologies trying to pave way, and then the actual controller was the one that made it.
yeah, and it was one that made it, and controllers still exist to these days. There's multiple architectures now. I would argue that the distributed architecture is probably the bigger architecture of the two these days, but there are still verticals that need controller architectures like that where they want to centralize the data plane,
Yeah.
or well, we use our controller platform at Extreme Networks in all the stadiums
Hmm.
Mhm.
that we do. That's the wireless platform we use there, as opposed to our distributed architecture.
Yeah, I think that's
So
a good thing for people to know is when to pick for a controller based model or, you know, decentralized model. I think it just really depends on the situation, but I think it's good that you
Yeah, I
bring that up.
mean, it depends. I mean, that's why you ask questions, right?
Yeah.
Different companies have different needs. Distributed architectures have grown with the advent of cloud as well. But in any kind of company that has locations everywhere, distributed architecture makes a lot of sense. Where you see centralized architectures like a controller, um, if they have big data centers, um, like I said, uh, stadiums, we use them a lot. Universities have traditionally used them quite a bit, in big giant campuses. But even they're starting to switch to more distributed architecture. So it really depends on the individual customer and the individual, what their actual requirements and needs are for their wireless network and their network in general. So,
Mm.
and sometimes it might be a combination of the two. So,
Yeah. Indeed.
okay, I have another question for you, David. And
sure.
this one is more talking about the industry, the Wi-Fi industry.
Mhm.
Um, So, what do you think of the Wi-Fi industry today compared to when you started?
Compared to when I started, well,
Yeah.
when I started, it really wasn't an industry. It was just a niche, right? Because so when I first started, it was just a couple of companies, Symbol and Proxim, and Cisco just had bought uh, the company out of Akron, and they were just had this little wireless demos that were in a
Uh-huh.
display and on a booth at conventions that were saying, "Hey, this is some new tech that we're doing," right? It was kind of a niche, but it caught on fast, right? So, um, now it's an entire industry. I mean, it's tied to networking in general, but there's a whole industry just for Wi-Fi, as you guys know, and it is the primary access technology of a generation. If you think about it, there's been
Hmm.
a whole generation of kids that have grown up with Wi-Fi. They've known it all their lives, right? They're in college, and Wi-Fi was around when they were born. So, um, but so yeah, it's become and initially, even though it wasn't an industry then, initially it was once again it was a niche. It was mainly for uh, initially Wi-Fi, providing wireless for data collection in warehouses, right?
Hmm.
It was used a lot for that. And there were still people doing a little bit of bridging, some point-to-point stuff and point-to-multipoint stuff, but it was more for, it really wasn't an enterprise technology. And then it really caught on more as a consumer technology first, I would say. So you've heard me talk a lot about the consumerization of IT, where consumers embrace the technology and then that forces the enterprise to adopt it. Well, Wi-Fi is another perfect example of that. Wi-Fi really, it really wasn't much of an enterprise technology. It was the consumer stuff first that where people embraced the tech and they loved it because they now had mobility, right? And that
Hmm.
mobility provided them a way where they didn't have to haul an Ethernet cord all around their house.
It's
So they liked that
convenience.
mobility and they
Yeah.
wanted it at work. And so they basically went to their IT director and demanded that they have Wi-Fi at work. And over time, the enterprise gradually started adopting it and really started to embrace it, in my mind, starting around 2010 when 802.11n came out. So.
Hmm. Hmm. And do you think the industry is mature now, like well organized, or do you still see like room for improvement in terms of how we work on the new standards and all of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's always room for improvement, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
So, I mean, and the technology is always changing. I mean, honestly, I'm just shocked about how fast it's moved. I mean, it's
Hmm.
25 years now, but I mean, just go back to when you asked me when I first got started, the speeds were like 1 and 2 megabits per second. Now the speeds are, gigabit speeds, right?
Yeah.
So, and then there's a more of an emphasis on efficiency and also latency now as well. So there's always room for improvement, but the industry as a whole is so big and it's such a huge ecosystem. So I think guys like you, the three of us and people that might be listening to this call, we typically think about Wi-Fi from an enterprise standpoint. But it's what
Hmm.
you got to understand, it's still huge on the consumer side too. As a
Yeah.
matter of
Hmm.
fact, the consumer side of Wi-Fi, enterprise pales into the amount of business and revenue that's generated because people use Wi-Fi 24/7, including at home and the consumer side of the industries. It's a whole different group of vendors and people and
Hmm.
solution providers than the people that we're typically used to in the enterprise. Um, at the end, an end user, the normal person in their daily life, I mean, they use Wi-Fi 24/7. They use it at home, they use it at work, they use it at play, and so if the industry continues to grow, um, I'm kind of meandering on a little long here. There's so many different aspects of the industry. There's the vendors, there's the WLPC community, the people that actually deploy. There's the deploy, design, and troubleshoot it. There's the partners that work with the vendors, right? And then once again, I said there's the consumer side, um, and so it's a huge industry. We're talking trillions of dollars over,
Mm.
on the worldwide economy. And, Spectrum, opening up the Spectrum has had a lot to do with that in recent years. And then a lot of you probably heard me talking about, and I will continue to talk till I retire about the value of 6 gigahertz and what it means for this industry.
Mm.
And so thinking about, I know you'll probably be retired by then, but thinking about like the next
Let's hope
10,
so.
15 years, what is your expectation on how Wi-Fi will evolve in the next 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so once again, I want to emphasize again, it remains the primary access technology. It's the first go-to. Yes, we use 5G and cellular, but and it is a access technology as well. But in the enterprise and at home, still your first go-to access technology is Wi-Fi, and I don't see that changing for a while. And that being said, so it's going to continue to evolve. Um, you know you always hear the first thing that people always talk about is speeds, right? And
Mm.
whatever, yeah, speeds always increase, but I think we hurt ourselves sometimes when we talk about speeds, because we say, and the consumer vendors are really bad about this. They'll say, 46 gigabits per second, of speed. And then you have to have the conversation that, well, data rates aren't the same thing as throughput. And
Yeah.
by the way, that only is in a laboratory environment in a Faraday cage. And so
Hmm.
the marketing around the speeds and the feeds is sometimes causes us false expectations.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, I think moving forward, the most important metric in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be latency.
Mm.
Um, and so a lot of work is going on with that right now. Wi-Fi 8 in particular will be probably the next version of Wi-Fi with multi-AP capabilities that if the technology works, it has some amazing theoretical implications for not only roaming enhancements, but sub-millisecond latency. And we're moving into a world where we have more latency intensive applications like VR and AR. And I know those get hyped a lot. Those technologies get hyped a lot as well, but those technologies are moving into the enterprise as well. It's not just for gaming. And I think they're going to be on the backbone of Wi-Fi, and the latency metric is going to become more and more important. There's a lot of other things that need to happen in the next 10, 15 years. One is sustainability. So with each new generation of APs, they seem to want more power, right?
Yeah.
And now that we're at 3 radio, 4 radio, 5 radio, and now you need PoE, 15 watts of PoE and gonna handle it anymore. Now you need at least AT, and now for the Big Daddy APs, the 4x4s, you need for full functionality BT power. The problem is worldwide and globally, there's like sustainability initiatives. Like over in Europe, they even have mandates to where companies have to show that they're saving energy and in like kilowatt hours and and dollars, right? So
Yeah.
there's a push in the entire industry to figure out ways where we can have better improved energy use and efficiency from not just our access points, but all our networking components. And whether that means something as simple as powering down APs to just like leave one radio chain on like at night or something like that, but also being able to track energy savings and kilowatts. So I say you'll see advancements in that. Convergence, you always hear about a lot, convergence with other wireless. And I think where people talk about convergence with other wireless, they talk about handoffs between
Mm.
5G and Wi-Fi, or
Yeah.
handoffs between, I've been hearing about that for years. I'm thinking more about the convergence for it will be more in the management plane, right? So being able to manage multiple wireless technologies in one single platform, right? And maybe even
Mm.
more convergence in terms of experience for the end users, not
Hmm.
necessarily handoffs from one technology to the other, but the user just doesn't know that there might be a switch between the tech, or
Yeah.
you're using multiple wireless technologies at once, but it's the same experience for the
Yeah.
users. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
And
And they
then
don't really care about the technology. They just want
no,
whatever they're using to
yeah.
work.
How many people have you talked to that, they say that say when you're talking on your phone, like, and when you're in the car, they think you're using Wi-Fi, or they call the
Yeah.
cellular Wi-Fi, or they call the Wi-Fi the 5G,
Yeah.
they don't care. They just want to get, to be fast, frictionless, and have the mobility.
Hmm.
Really, I could go on this topic for a long time, but I'll just say two more things for the future of Wi-Fi. Spectrum is going to be important. Um, I think you'll see more spectrum open up besides 6 gigahertz. We haven't finished that. That's a problem right now, especially, I mean, we're spoiled because in Canada and the United States, we got all 1200 megahertz of spectrum, and now we're getting it for standard power and outdoor as well. But we don't have that in the rest of the world, right? In a lot of the other parts of the world, including Europe, you only have 480 megahertz of space. And so the other regulatory bodies are kind of dragging their feet, and they need to get with it. And also with standard power too. So there's a lot of work that still needs to go to spectrum harmonization. But there could be, Wi-Fi can operate in any spectrum, right? It can operate in low bandwidth, high bandwidth. So we'll see if why. I'm very interested in Wi-Fi Hollow. That seems to be growing a little bit, but the ecosystem is very small, right? It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. I really like the tech, but there's competing technologies like LoRaWAN. But I like the technology, but it's a chicken and egg thing. There's not a lot of client devices for it yet. So for vendors to start investing in it, there also needs to be a client ecosystem. But more
Yeah.
spectrum, maybe even 7 gigahertz. There's been
Mm.
talk of that, a little bit of that. And finally, and this is, you guys are going to kill me for even saying this, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. In AI, okay. I mean, how many times have we heard about AI and autonomous networking stuff?
Hmm.
But we're just on the cusp of that. We're just getting started with that, to
Yeah.
be honest with you.
No, I think
Um,
it has a place. I think we'll find some use out of it.
Yeah, it does. And the advancements in AI technology are moving so fast, it's hard to even keep up. The generative AI in particular has been a game changer. And so you hear lots of vendors talk about autonomous networking, and
Hmm.
the network just runs itself. That doesn't exist yet, but
Yeah.
more of that's on the way, I think, in the coming years. So.
Hmm. Okay. That's a big future right there.
Right, which means that you need to learn how to use AI,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
That's
so,
true.
so,
Yeah, I think it's going to be useful for any line of work.
Hmm.
yeah, we get that question all the time. It's like, will AI replace you, right? And the answer is, and you'll hear most experts say, the people that are going to be replaced are the people that don't learn how to use AI in their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I mean, look, I already use ChatGPT every day for all kinds of things, and
Hmm.
I'm no AI expert.
No. Yeah.
I'm not a
We
data scientist, but I figured out weird things that I can do with it to save me time and make me more productive.
Yeah, I mean
So,
we've had an episode about Chat GPT, and I think that's actually one of the more popular episodes, surprisingly. It's just how to use
yeah,
Chat GPT with your day-to-day job.
yeah, and I figure out something new every day, or somebody else shows me something that
Yeah.
they did with it, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And I've used ChatGPT for my personal life sometimes, just to figure out things, and
Hmm.
just even I said earlier that I was self-employed for 10 years, and I ran my own consulting and training company for Wi-Fi. Well, now you can write a business plan in ChatGPT, and it'll help you write a business plan. And like,
Yeah.
you can write a really good business
Hmm.
plan by working with ChatGPT, and maybe at the end of 45 minutes, you got a business plan that might have would have taken you a week to write,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
I do
things
think
like
that
that. It just,
I do think the key part with AI is going to be how good your prompt is, because you can give it such a vague prompt, but garbage in, garbage out. It might
oh
not be
yeah.
exactly what you want, and some people would just run with it. But if you could learn to optimize your prompt, you're going to get such good results out of ChatGPT.
Optimizing your prompt, and it's also the data sets that are also feeding the beast, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, right now we're talking chat gpt, which is basically like a public generative AI, but lots of companies now are working on their own version of generative AI with their own internal data sets, right?
Mhm.
That are not going to be available necessarily out there on the internet, and that's I've every company in the world right now is in a race right now to create their own kind of version of this technology, and a bunch of them are going to fail, but they you got to try it, because if you don't if you don't get on that bandwagon, you're probably going to be left in the dust.
Yeah. There is one comment from YouTube where Gurman's asking you if you could tell the story behind Devin Aiken's chicken and eggs paper, or the 8211i AKM paper.
And I can't, yeah, I can't
He
believe
he heard
people
you were
remember these things.
the reason he wrote it.
So I was trying to figure out how the four-way handshake worked. Okay. And I was reading this standard, and four-way handshake was new, right? It was WPA was out. It wasn't even WPA2, but it was in the standard. It was 802.11i, right? And I was trying to figure out how it worked, and I was looking at the packet captures, and I'm still like scratching my head. And I mean, you guys have looked at it. Have you ever, for people out there that are watching, reading the 802.11 standard and having it as reference, it's a great thing, but trying to read it sometimes is very challenging
Yeah.
because it's written by engineers. Okay.
And they don't
So,
explain. They
and
just
they
said
don't
this is
explain.
how.
Yeah. And very often, like one thing, you have to go to like 20 different places in the standard to figure out, put it all together. So it's not easy. So anyway, I couldn't figure it out. And so I called up Aiken on the phone, and I said, dude, um, do you have can you try to walk me through this? Because I guess had already figured it out better than me at the time. And so we're literally talking on the telephone. This is before smartphones too. I think as we were holding up, So there was no smartphone. I was actually holding a phone up and talking on the telephone. And so he was explaining the PMKs and the PTKs to me, and he started talking about using analogies about, oh, his daddy was a farmer, and then there's chickens, and the PMKs are golden eggs, and the PTKs are different colored eggs, and something just clicked, and I joked to him. I said, "That is a weird analogy, dude, and you should write a white paper about that and using that analogy." So he did it, and it actually helped a lot of people learn the tech. And I think they posted that white paper up on their website at the time. This is like 2004 or something like that. And it was the most downloaded web paper that CMP had up to that time, because nobody knew how the four-way handshake worked. Now, we all take it for granted because
Hmm.
we've all learned it, we've all seen it, and we've all taught each other. But back then, and two, and I'm glad he asked that, because I'm a big believer in visual learning, and analogies are also very helpful for learning.
Hmm.
So I try to use analogies all the time. We were just talking about the IEEE documentation, right? So one of the reasons I think I've had a successful career is I've been able to sit down with like even like really people that are much smarter than me, engineers like at Extreme Networks, and get them to explain some complex topic to me. And maybe I might have to have them explain it like 5 times, but then my job is that I can then take it and explain it in a easier to understand way to the layman, or to the average system engineer out there that doesn't speak engineerese, right?
Yeah.
But they speak chicken and egg, So,
Yeah.
so, so visual learning and analogies, they help a lot, and they can apply even to advanced, complex topics like 802.11 technology.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I have another question then we can move on.
Sure.
And this one is, if you could change one thing about Wi-Fi, what would it be? If you could change anything in the standard, what would you change? It
Can we
could be
get rid
any
of
time.
anything?
Yeah,
Can we get rid of backward compatibility?
yeah, it's up to you.
I mean, the backward compatibility has become a double-edged sword, right? So, and I talk about and joke about this all the time. As an industry, we've kept things so that really old equipment can still connect to the newer equipment. So you can have an 802.11b device from 2003 or 2002 still connect to your now Wi-Fi 7 network.
Mhm.
And people are like, woohoo, we got backward compatibility. But the double-edged sword is that 802.11b device is connecting to your Wi-Fi 7 network, and it's dragging everybody down. Like, so all the protection mechanisms and stuff that we've built in that cause all the overhead. And then not only that, it's not only that, even, I mean, we build in this backward compatibility, but as you know, half the time it doesn't work
Yeah.
sometimes. So that's always been a problem. Like, so you come out with a new feature in let's say Wi-Fi 8, and you turn that feature on, there's a new information element. And the new information element's in a beacon frame or a probe response frame. And then the drivers from an 802.11g radio see that and they go, and they can't connect. I mean, how many times have you had that? We've all had that problem, right? So there's, look, I get it. If there was one thing I could change, there would be greater standard, maybe a less of an emphasis in the backward compatibility. And I would love to see better standardization and certification on the client side,
Yeah.
because there's a zillion client vendors out there, and they don't always interpret the standards the same as everybody. So that
Hmm.
causes all kinds of connectivity and performance problems. And, sometimes as a vendor, Extreme Networks, what we have to do is sometimes we have to go in and recode some of our firmware in AP just to make something work that a client has done wrong, or to handle the fact that they're using some driver on a MacBook or something
Yeah.
can't handle an information element, right? So we have to
Hmm.
recode something just so that customer's old clients can still connect. And I mean, I'm going down a lot of rabbit holes here, but that's, we
Mhm.
see a refresh on the enterprise APs, about every 4 or 5 years, or
Yeah.
depending on the vertical, maybe a
I
little
was
longer.
just
But
thinking that.
clients stick around for like 10 years,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Or sometimes
Mhm.
longer.
Longer.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Just
longer.
imagine all these
So
IoT devices in the enterprise
uh,
stuck on the wall that haven't been replaced, but the APs are always being replaced. But you're still having to
yeah,
enable the older protocols, the older security methods, just
we
to
we
keep
still
them
have
online.
we still have some customers that use TKIP. So they're few and far between. But yeah, you guys probably know a lot in the manufacturing industry. There's a lot or warehousing. There's a lot of people that have data collection units like old Intermec or really old symbol gear,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and it's still running, right? And it's, and the stuff is literally 22 years old. And I always, they don't want to spend the money to upgrade them.
No.
Yeah.
But and they don't want to spend the money to upgrade them. And then, I always use the analogy like, well, do you still use fax machines?
Hmm.
And sometimes I go, yes, I do still use a fax machine. But at the end of the day, how often do you still use a fax machine? So, I mean, at some point you have to move on and say goodbye
Mhm.
to old
Yeah.
things. And,
Yeah.
it
The
reminds me of my mother and stepfather. They're like in their late 80s now, right? And I remember upgrading computers for them, right? And like they were like, "Well, I don't understand why we have to get a new computer. My TV lasts for 12 years." So it's like, I said, yeah, but you want to use this new application. It's not going to run
Right.
on the
Right.
latest on your computer from 10 years ago. So it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's funny about the fax machines because there was at one point where I just did not want a fax machine, so I got a digital fax machine so I can just get it as an email, send the fax. It would still go to a
Oh,
regular fax
was
machine.
that like a cloud service or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that?
Talk
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah,
backwards compatibility there.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only industry that still uses faxes is like doctors and pharmaceutical
Hmm.
and pharmacies. They still use
Yeah,
faxes for some reason. So it's like, have you ever heard of email?
Yeah.
I know. Like, let's get
So
with the times. Scan it in.
yeah.
Something. You think there'd
But
be a way to do it?
it's the same thing, and it causes us problems. And I know we've got a little off track from the original question, but it causes us problems because you will have customers that will literally sometimes spend millions of dollars upgrading their infrastructure, but then they don't want to spend money on the clients,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they didn't budget for it. So,
Hmm.
and I'm not, so I think I don't know. The backward compatibility and better client interoperability would be the two things I would like to change.
Hmm. Okay.
And do you think the standards, the 802.11 standards, are moving too fast, trying to introduce more and more features while ultimately they'll never be used in the real world?
Well, that's a great question, and I think there is a disconnect between like the IEEE and the people that actually deploy, design, and troubleshoot Wi-Fi. Um, they have two different objectives. But that being said, I am encouraged by some of the recent conversations that have been going on between the WLPC community and the Wi-Fi Alliance.
Hmm.
So I know that Kevin Robinson from the Wi-Fi Alliance has reached out to that community and vice versa.
Hmm.
And to get those communities talking is a good start. Um, I have to walk a fine line here because a big part of my job is I'm an evangelist for new 802.11 technology and the
Hmm.
promises of some of these new features. So I talk a lot about new features and new technologies that aren't always fully baked. But
Hmm.
that being said, you've probably heard me also say I never believe anything until it's been field tested, right? Um, and sometimes that's what it takes. So sadly, some of these technologies don't always meet their promise. So probably the biggest one that comes to mind for a lot of people is multi-user MIMO. The technology worked with other wireless technologies, and it has some very unique use cases with Wi-Fi where it works, like point to multi-point bridging. But for client to AP, there's nobody even turns it on. I mean, have you guys ever turned it on other than to test it?
We
You
turned
know,
it
so
off.
yeah,
I turn it
yeah.
off.
So, and it just didn't scale well. It just didn't. It doesn't. It works well in a Faraday cage for Wi-Fi, but it doesn't work in the field.
Hmm.
And so it just never met its promise in a production environment. Um, OFDMA is another one that probably was hyped a lot in the beginning, but seems to be starting to pan out, especially in 6 gigahertz now that we're moving into further generations of chipsets. And with 6 gigahertz, we don't have all the protection mechanisms. The technology for OFDMA, there seems to be benefit from it now. With I'm encouraged by some of the early data on MLO. There's different kinds of MLO for Wi-Fi 7. There's both the aggregate and also the link steering. But at the end of the day, none of that's fully baked yet either. I think it's going to be a while before we reap the benefits of MLO, for example. So, but to answer the question, no, I don't think it moves too fast because innovation requires fast movement, and it's okay to fail,
Hmm.
and it's okay for things not necessarily to work. So I would not want the IEEE engineers to slow down by any means. But what ultimately gets built into the chipsets and what is mandatory for certification, that's a whole nother conversation, but honestly, I think, and I think some of us in our community, what I would call the WLPC community, we get a little bit skeptical sometimes with some
Yeah.
of these new features, and sometimes rightfully so.
Yeah.
But that being said, and that's why you've heard me also say that Spectrum is the biggest thing to happen to Wi-Fi in the last 10,
Yes.
15 years. But, I some of the latest in the last couple of generations of Wi-Fi, I'll just end it like this. In the last couple of generations of Wi-Fi, there's been a couple of features that have been promised to cure cancer, and they haven't cured cancer. Okay. That being said, that doesn't mean that we should slow down on the innovation. Look, I mean, Wi-Fi 7 is the sexy new thing right now, and you'll hear me evangelize about it until I retire. And I'm still hopeful for it. But to be honest with you, the thing I'm more interested in is Wi-Fi 8. I don't know if I'll still be around, or maybe my boss keeps telling me I can't retire until Wi-Fi 8 comes out. That's like 4 or 5 years out. But that technology to me is more interesting.
Okay.
But will it work? We won't know, So, but it certainly looks promising in terms of latency. And I'll allude back to my earlier answer where I was saying that I think the most important metric moving forward for the industry in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be latency. So.
Okay. I got one question from YouTube. Does David still have a home lab? And if so, what was his most recent project in the home lab? If you're allowed to talk about it.
No, I can. So my home lab is like in transition. So my home lab was in Atlanta, my house in Atlanta. It still kind of is. And I'm in the process of trying to get my house wired here. And I'm going to put a rack in a storage closet back there and kind of replicate that and build a new home lab at my new primary home in the mountains. I got to be honest, I don't touch things like I used to. And that's the part of my job that I miss the most. I used to be more like more of a TME where I was constantly playing with our gear and touching it. Now, where I'm touching it more now is when new generations of Wi-Fi came out. So probably the one that I spent a lot of time on was a couple of years ago when Wi-Fi 6E was coming out and nobody knew how it was worked. And when we had all our beta stuff, I was playing with that as well as playing, honestly, with a bunch of consumer gear and looking at frames and stuff like that. And I'm starting to do that with Wi-Fi 7 now and starting to look at those capabilities and learning. But I don't. Do I lab up things and try to replicate problems and build things? And no, not anymore. I have some really good people at the company that do that on a regular basis. Like you guys might have seen Carl Benedict speak at WLPC. That guy can troubleshoot or design anything, and so a lot. And I work with some other really good TMEs at our company at Extreme, like Andrew Garcia and Thomas Sophia, where quite frankly, I don't have the time and that's their job. And I'll call them up and say, hey, could you quickly set this up and test something for me? But that being said, I miss that part because that was the fun part, was touching stuff all the time, but I don't touch things as much as I used to, sadly.
No worries. Only if you need to, right?
Yeah. Well, or I can call you guys up and say, hey. So.
Okay, I have two questions about CWNE. First one is, what tip do you have for aspiring CWNEs? And the second one is, what direction should CWNEs take today with the complexity of Wi-Fi?
For CWNEs, if you're like already a little just getting new to wireless, or you've been in wireless a while and you aspire to be a CWNE, I would say just do it. If you do the work and get that CWNE number, it's a small club, and that will open up a lot of doors for you. So it's not easy. You got to learn the tech. You obviously have to get hands on the gear, and you need to work with qualified people. So involve yourself in WLPC, watch podcasts like this, touch stuff, learn packet analysis, learn spectrum analysis, learn how to design Wi-Fi, learn how to troubleshoot Wi-Fi, you know, and then do it, do it in as part of your job, even if it has to be an entry level job. I promise you, if you get it in an entry level in this industry, you will be at a medium level within 2 years, easy, probably less. There are way more jobs in this industry than there are way more positions and people looking for qualified people than there are qualified people. There's a lot of
Mm.
people out there deploying Wi-Fi that don't have a clue to what they're doing still
Mm.
to this day. And surround yourself with successful and smart people, and not just technical people, but successful and smart people in general. I would also, for directions for other things that CWNE should do is, I mentioned writing earlier. If you go onto the WLPC YouTube channel, there's a couple of videos of me talking about how writing is good for your career. I've mentioned, and you don't have to write a book. It could be simple as something as having a podcast
Mhm.
or writing a blog that helps get your name out there and also reinforces learning. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's great for your career. You should have not just wireless skill sets, you need multiple skill sets, right? You need to learn wired networking because at the end of the day, what is a wireless AP? It's a portal into a wired network 99% of the time. So you need to learn wired networking. Um, it's kind of, I think we know now in the world of APIs, you better learn. I never did it because I'm an old man, but you should, if you're young, you should be learning scripting in Python. And as I mentioned earlier, learn how to use AI too.
Mhm.
But in whatever career you're in, learn how to use it to make your job easier. But going back to the original question, that CW, the program, it's been around for a while, but that CWNE number does hold some value. They just don't hand them out to anybody. You have to prove that you've done the work and have experience. But it's a long slog, but once you get it, it does wonders for your career. And look, we're really lucky guys. We work in an industry where we're working with cool technology too, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's not like we're talking about, okay, what's your job? It's like, oh, I do the ACLs on a firewall on a daily basis, or IP subnetting, right? I mean, we're working with some pretty cool technology and it continues to get cool. And so, that's why, people, but you always got to learn, right? You got to learn and you have to have multiple skill sets.
All right. So to finish up, David, we have a couple of
Sure.
questions for you, more personal.
Uh-oh.
The, the
I
first one, I
didn't do
think,
it.
the first one I think is from me, but it's the question is, if you were not doing Wi-Fi, what would you be doing?
Yeah, it's all about different choices in life. It's hard to say. A lot of people don't know this about me, but from the years when I was 18 to about 32, I was in a different industry altogether. I was in the music industry and I worked for a couple of record companies over the years, doing artist relations and radio promotion. Then I found myself in segueing into computers because it was a hobby. Um, you know, I think I'd still be doing something in technology in some way and something entrepreneurial. If I had to do things over a little bit, I think I probably would have tried to get maybe an MBA business degree too, so I could do more entrepreneurial kind of stuff. But I definitely think it would be something still on the technical side of things.
Mm. Awesome.
Interesting. Okay, and then a last question for you, David. What do you do outside of work? You mentioned having fun with your pickup truck in the mountains, but
Yeah.
what do you do outside of work that helps you clear your mind so you
Yeah.
come back fresh?
So I'm in my home in the mountains is surrounded by national forest land, and as soon as I step out the door, I have access to hundreds of miles of hiking trails.
How do you get a fiber? How did you get a fiber to your home?
They ran fiber up. I'm in a neighborhood with about 20 homes on the top of a mountain. And when they built the neighborhood like 16 years ago, they ran fiber up the mountain.
Oh, wow, okay.
But on the other 3/4 of the mountain is national forest land. So I have direct access. So my wife and I do a lot of hiking along with the dog. And we're nature. I see deer every day, bears. I've been on Zoom calls before, and a bear's looking in the window. So, you know, so so that's like, so nature, just getting out here. And I still have a home in the city, but I'm really enjoying the quieter mountain country life. And but at the end of the day, I still have to go in the big city, go to the airports, and earn a few dollars and do some work for my employer, Extreme Networks. So,
awesome.
And can I plug my employer real quick? I know that's
Of course.
Yeah,
shameless.
go for it. Of course you
So
can.
if anybody doesn't know, I work with the Office of the CTO of Extreme Networks. I get to work with some people that are way smarter than me, that are working on new technologies. I get to work a lot with our product team, and I work a lot with our sales team. And so I have a really cool position, and I'm very, very blessed. And if you don't know about Extreme Networks, I would encourage you to go to our website, extremenetworks.com. A lot of people know about us, but our stadium Wi-Fi, but we do Wi-Fi for all verticals. And I would also encourage, and here's the other shameless plug, if you haven't learned about our fabric technology, which is nobody else can even match it. People, once they get on our fabric technology, they never go back. And so extremenetworks.com, please stop by. And I'll say there's going to be a big PR announcement next Monday, too, a week from today. So check back, too. So some big PR about some of our new tech.
And just in case you're listening to this after the fact, it is Monday, December 2nd.
Yeah, so that'll be December 9th. Yes.
Okay.
So December 9th. You can go to our website anytime, but December 9th, I mean, you can find out about some new cool announcements of some stuff that we're doing. But yeah, so, I'm a lucky guy. I've been blessed to be in the industry. And, I was just talking to my wife, and she was asking me, "Do you know these guys are going to interview?" And I say, "Yeah, I know these characters. They've been around for a while." So it's a really, not only do we work with cool technology fellows, but we also have this kind of cool community too that's developed out of it. And so a lot of us know each other, and even guys like you mentioned Devin and Keith Parsons. Keith and I, we used to compete against each other. We used to compete against each other, but then we also used to throw work to each other. Then he ended up working for the same vendor that I worked for a while. And then we started competing with each other again. So but we're all friends, and we all learn from each other. And I don't know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know of any other part of the networking industry that kind of has that little WLPC type community that has kind of grown worldwide and continues to grow.
Yeah,
so,
where somebody always knows somebody in the same industry, different vendor, different company, but still friendly.
Yeah. And
it's always a pleasure.
Yeah. It is. So I'm happy to take any more questions. I can stay along, but I know you probably guys want to cut this off. But if you have another question, I'm happy to take it.
Okay, last question, because someone is asking is, what is the office of the CTO? Like, what is this, and who is the CTO? Like,
our CTO his name is Nabil Bakari, and I report directly up to the EMA CTO and our VP of AI engineering, Marcus Nisbel. And the office of the CTO, it's very small. They look at a lot of
is it futuristic
tech. I'm sorry?
I said, is it a club?
Well, yeah. So other companies have offices. Our competitors have offices of CTO. So it's a lot of times that what they do is investigate technology that it might be 10 years out. And or start playing and maybe start doing proof of concepts with some new technology, and then if it can work, and if we like it, then it gets handed off to the product team, and the product team might productize it. And so, so it's It's a little bit different, but it's allowed me freedom to do a lot of different things and work with a lot of different creative people in different departments of the company, as well as our customers and our partners.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, David. Well, thank you for your time today.
Hey, it's been fun, fellas. So
It's always a pleasure.
Who's your next guest?
Well,
who's your next victim?
We haven't decided. Maybe if you have a recommendation, we could reach out.
Sure. You're happy to, but hey, listen, I enjoyed it, and happy to come back anytime, guys, and keep it up, because podcasts like this, and we talked a lot about learning and how to advance your career and stuff like this. I was just talking to Blair Donald, who works in our PR department, about all the various podcasts that are out there for the industry. That's another way to learn and disseminate information, and it's very valuable. So we appreciate what you fellas are doing. So thank you, and thank you for having me.
And thank you for everyone who joined in on the live stream that we're watching, and also adding your questions. Really appreciate the engagement there. Also for the folks on LinkedIn. But if anyone wants to hear more, just go to cleardescend.net. We'll have this recording posted there. And, David Coleman's on X. So if you want to ask your question directly, I'm sure you could hit him up on X and
LinkedIn or Twitter at Mr. Multipath. So
yeah. And get his book. Highly recommend getting the CWNE study guide. That's the one book I always recommend to anyone who says, where should I go for certifications? And I think I have like 2 copies. Yeah, I got 2. I have the previous one and the current one.
Well, thank you. That I made $2.
Hey, but like you said, it's your calling card, right? And
it's the calling card, and it's become I guess where my co-author and I talk about this all the time. What we're most proud of is a lot of people have used that as a vendor neutral guide, and they've used that, and their careers have changed. And I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me and said, because we read your book, I now make 40,000 more a year, or I changed jobs, and it's been very humbling. So.
Yeah, and I highly recommend even just getting started writing as well. I started off with a blog, then doing the podcast form here with Francois, and yes, we do learn a lot, because we don't know everything when we write or when we talk about it. We have to do the research, and then occasionally, you just don't have to be afraid of it. Someone will correct you, and then you just keep learning. And that's just how it works. I mean, we're not here to attack each other, but we're just here to learn and teach others as well.
Yep. So.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for joining.
All right, fellas. All right, thanks again, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right, fellas. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.